Well, good morning, my fellow patriots. I'll give you all just one guess as to where I am this week. Anybody? Yep, you guessed it. I'm back down in Midland, Texas, conducting some classroom training as well as some more field work with some workover rigs in the Permian Basin. It was a quick turn and burn trip home last week. I don't believe I mentioned last weekend's activity in the latest episode, so I'll provide a brief update on that. So I flew in and landed in Knoxville around noon Saturday. Once I picked up my luggage, I rushed home to pick up my bride so that we could attend a meeting at our church. And then we attended Saturday evening services there as well. The meeting was just to go over the replacement trip we are going on in place of the canceled Holy Land trip. This trip will be incredible. It will take me back to a part of the world that I visited back in 2013 when I was still on active duty, but it will be completely new to Denise. Of course, the reasons behind my previous trip and this upcoming one are completely different. In 2013, I was serving as the Command Master Chief of the guided missile cruiser USS Monterey. The Monterey was one of the many ballistic missile defense ships in our nation's arsenal at the time, and we were part of what was called the European Phase Adaptive Approach. That just means the ship I was serving on was part of the ballistic missile defense for our allies in Europe. This upcoming trip will be completely different as it is another sort of pilgrimage where the Bible will come to life for Denise and I, along with our fellow travelers. The trip is called In the Steps of St. Paul, and we will be visiting many of the sites where the Apostle Paul preached and started his kingdom building in the New Testament. We'll be visiting Corinth, Ephesus, Thessalonica, and even the island of Patmos, where the Apostle John was given the vision written down in the book of Revelation. There are many other locations we will be visiting as well, such as Athens, Mykonos, Santorini, and Delphi among them. It looks like an exciting trip for all involved, and I will be filling in the audience on what my bride and I encounter and feel during the trip. Now, that means that there will be a gap in episodes later this spring. Probably just 2 episodes, but possibly 3 when I factor in my work schedule, prep schedule, and the trip all together. I'll try to put something together, sort of like a best of type show. We'll just have to wait and see as the trip time frame gets closer. Enough about the meeting, but shortly after that, last Monday, if you follow the news at all, something else happened. No, I'm not referring to the Iowa caucuses. I'm referring to the snowpocalypse that hit Tennessee. We ended up with around 7 inches of snow at my house throughout the day Monday and into Tuesday morning. My house must have been right on the edge of a band of a snow line, too, because my daughter and her husband, they only got about 3 inches of snow, and their house is only a mile south of mine. The cities of Sevierville, Pigeon Forge, and Gatlinburg had mostly freezing rain events. It doesn't matter what the form of precipitation, though, because the temperatures in the county did not get above freezing until Thursday, and then only for a little bit. Even into Friday morning, it made for some treacherous driving, let me tell you. Of course, the weather had me lying to myself, as we'll discuss later in the show. That's what we're going to discuss today, though. Lies. The lies we tell ourselves. Lies about the so-called border crisis. Lies about the role of government and elected officials, and a few others. With all that being said, let's get on with this week's show of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to a show where we will discuss how the citizens of this republic must continuously fight to maintain our liberty, and those fights are increasingly against our own government. Some of the episodes on liberty will shine a light on exactly how all levels of government are seeking to erode our constitutionally protected rights. We will also discuss the leadership needed to restore our constitutional republic, as well as providing examples of good and bad people in leadership positions in all facets of our society. Additionally, we will discuss the lies the people in positions of power and influence spread every day so they can maintain those same positions. I'm your host, Larry Linden, retired U.S. Navy veteran, small business owner, and candidate for the Tennessee House of Representatives, and this is the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Once again, good morning, folks. I got to thinking when I put this week's show together that there is no shortage of material I can use when discussing lies. Specifically, the lies our government, and even the ones looking to serve in our government, tell we the people every day. That is why I titled this week's show Lies in Abundance. Before I get too deep into the show, I need to thank a couple of listeners who emailed me after last week's show. They caught on to what I was trying to convey about the unaccompanied minor that traveled on the same plane I was on for my return trip from Dallas to Knoxville. If you recall, I told the audience about the unaccompanied minor that was escorted onto the plane by airline staff, who were immediately followed by two older, non-English speaking men that had boarding group 9 on their passes. It was great that these listeners picked up on that tidbit I shared, and also ties into this week's topic and the lie that is being referred to as the border crisis. Looking back at the event, I may have witnessed what could have been human trafficking. Because why would the airline board those two older gentlemen right after the unaccompanied minor was allowed to board the plane? Especially given the fact that I clearly saw the boarding passes those two men were carrying. They had Group 9 printed on them. We have all heard the reports from people watching this unfold at our border about the number of children crossing the border with people that were not related to them. If you all remember, at the end of May last year, 2023, the Child Sniffer-in-Chief's administration made a conscious decision not to renew a Trump-era pilot program that conducted rapid DNA testing of illegal immigrants crossing the border. That testing program was implemented in 2019 to keep illegal immigrants from trafficking children by falsely claiming a family relationship. While that program was in place, cheek swabs were used to collect DNA material of people caught illegally entering our country. That swab was typically analyzed within 90 minutes to determine whether there was a parent-child relationship. This program was put into place because of the growing number of fake family units arriving at the U.S. border. It became a serious problem because of a 2015 court ruling in the Flores litigation. In that ruling, the district court held that CBP could only detain minors, regardless of whether they are accompanied by a parent or guardian, for a maximum of 20 days. This decision was affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court in 2016, which of course led to the widespread release of minors with parents or guardians who accompany them. Once the cartels and human traffickers realized that illegally entering our country as family unit almost certainly ensured release, families headed toward the U.S.-Mexico border in droves, as well as the human traffickers seeing this as a golden opportunity. Between 2015 and 2019, the number of family units apprehended at the southern border by Border Patrol skyrocketed from almost 40,000 to 473 plus thousand. Once the DNA program started in 2019, the results showed that 30% of illegal immigrants arriving with children they claimed as theirs were in fact not related to the children at all. And since Biden and the rest of the commie cartel in DC saw this testing program as an impediment to their facilitation of this invasion along our southern border, they made the decision to terminate it. Some see it as inexplicable, but people capable of critical thinking can see the reasoning behind it. Factored into their decision to end the DNA testing program is that the open border groups, those communist groups that want to fundamentally transform our constitutional republic, they have long complained about the DNA test, complaining that they were invasive and violate the privacy rights of illegal immigrants. In all actuality, the DNA testing probably interrupted their supply chain of human trafficking victims. Because those same people have even claimed that human trafficking is not a serious enough problem to justify the cheek swabs, and argue that biology alone does not determine family relationships. Pull my other leg, commies, because it plays jingle bells. In an attempt to fix the situation, Representative Lance Gooden of Texas introduced legislation known as the Biometric Verification for Entry and Reconfirming Identification with Forensics, or B-Verify Act. That bill would have required that biometric data, including DNA, be collected by the Department of Homeland Security from all illegal immigrants apprehended by the 3 immigration agencies within DHS. It would also require the agencies to conduct more stringent background checks on individuals with whom unaccompanied alien children are to be placed. Just as important, The Be Verify Act requires the collection of biometric data before the administering of any immigration benefit and permanently bars a parent or guardian who knowingly sends a child across the border illegally from adjusting their immigration status. The goal of that piece of legislation was to help secure the border, discourage asylum fraud by mass illegal immigration, and to deter human trafficking. All items that are opposed by the communists at every level of government, hence the so-called border crisis. That term is a lie in and of itself. It's not a border crisis. It is an invasion, enabled and facilitated by the communists to advance their great replacement theory, which is just a means for them to keep political power, not only the number of representatives that they get in the House, but also maintain presidential elector numbers in their poop-hole blue states. As Representative Golden pointed out, it is violent cartels that are using children as pawns in their illicit border operations, as well as sending convicted criminals to infiltrate our borders unopposed. Some reports state the belief that the dementia patient's administration is asleep at the wheel in this situation. That is a lie, because Biden and the rest of the cabal aren't sleeping on this issue. They are carrying out their plan. The Be Verify Act is similar in spirit and intent to the End Child Trafficking Now Act, which was introduced in the U.S. Senate by our very own Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. Her bill would require DHS to deport illegal immigrant adults who refuse to submit to a DNA test, mandate a maximum 10-year prison sentence to those claiming fabricated family ties to a minor, and criminalize child recycling, which is the use of one child as a get into the U.S. free card repeatedly by many non-related illegal immigrants. Now, the use of biometric data and the goal of legislation that would deter child trafficking, it shouldn't be controversial at all. After all, airports already utilize biometrics to quickly check the identities of travelers during the immigration process. In many countries, including the United Kingdom and those in the European Union, use these objective measurements of physical characteristics. Any and all attempts to put a stop to the invasion on our border, as well as the human trafficking component of it, are met with fierce opposition by the Democrat Party. The Communist Party. Supporting them or their policies, which are composed mainly of lies, is a contribution to the downfall of our republic. So let me thank those listeners that picked that clue up on last week's show. All of that served as a backdrop to watching the Sound of Freedom movie for the third time this past week. I watched it with Denise, who was seeing it for the first time. It is still as stomach turning on the third viewing as it was on the first. It had a profound impact on Denise as well. If you have not seen that movie yet, please do so. Regardless of the current allegations surrounding the main character right now, whatever is happening to Mr. Ballard right now does not change the fact of what is documented in the movie. But more on the abundant lies, though, on the other side of this next break. And with that, we'll be right back. Okay, folks, we're back. In this week's introduction, I mentioned how last week's snowpocalypse had me lying to myself. Just how would that be, you may be asking? Well, simple, really. And it just points back to the fact of how much I dislike going to see a doctor. If you recall in last week's episode, I talked about how I mysteriously injured my knee while I was down in Midland the week before last. Well, it had slowly started to feel better, which really meant it just didn't hurt as bad as it initially did. Add to that the fact that the VA had told me to stop in at an urgent care center that accepted VA patients once I got back into town, since the local office would be closed for the federal holiday last Monday. Well, Monday rolled around and the snowstorm was upon us. Since I don't like visiting doctors anyway, especially urgent care centers where I know I would waste more than half a day just sitting there waiting to see somebody, I blew off going in at all. After all, the knee did not hurt as bad as it initially did, so it must be getting better, right? Au contraire, mon frere. Just a walking workout on the treadmill in the home gym set me straight on that issue. So the local VA called me again last Tuesday afternoon to check to see if I'd been in to see somebody, which of course I had not. The nurse passed that message on to my care team, and I received a call on Wednesday to set up an early Friday morning appointment at the Sevierville VA outpatient clinic. Well, Friday morning rolled around, and I went in to see my primary care manager. I got the news that I was expecting, plus a bit more. It was good news, though. The news that I was expecting is that I need an x-ray. I think that's always the standard answer. I also know that the x-rays will not reveal anything since I probably have a soft tissue injury, either a tendon or a ligament or the meniscus in the knee that isn't working as designed. There isn't any obvious deformity in my knee, as well as no bruising or swelling. But that is the way the medical world works, right? Always x-rays first. The good news, though, is that my PCM, after her examination, listed me in the system as a traveling veteran so that I can get the x-rays done while I'm down here in Midland for these next 3 weeks. She also ordered a knee brace and some other medications that will be delivered straight to my hotel as well. I'll just have to make some arrangements to run out and get the x-rays done while I'm on a break from training. Once the x-rays are read by the radiologist, I assume that my PCM will then have to order an MRI. Maybe it can be done down in Midland, or maybe I'll have to wait until I return home again in February. So the lessons I learned in this situation are: one, I'm not getting any younger, so it takes longer to bounce back from an injury. And two, I need to follow the medical advice I'm given, even if it means long wait times at an urgent care location. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if I learn from those lessons if something like this happens to me again in the future. Enough about lying to myself, though. Hopefully, I won't make that same mistake again in the future. This walking around with a limp for 2 weeks now, and especially having to do it while hauling a suitcase around the airport a couple of times, is definitely for the birds. Right now, though, I want to focus on a lie that most of the electorate eats up: hook, line, and sinker. It ties into a couple of things. The first it relates to are some of the wisest words that Ronald Reagan ever spoke. The second thing it ties into is the difference between my campaign and the campaign of the other currently declared candidate in the race to become the GOP nominee for Tennessee's 12th House District. Now let's get to one of Ronaldus Maximus' most famous quotes. He spoke these words at a press conference back in August of 1986. The phrase is this, quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help," unquote. That is completely spot on analysis, right? We've all seen just how much the government has helped us out lately, haven't we? The follow the science mask mandates, which have been debunked numerous times. The first time was shortly after the Spanish flu outbreak, which happened more than 100 years ago. Or how about the latest non-mea culpa from Fauci concerning the 6-foot social distancing requirement? The fraudster himself admitted that government mandate that led to the painted or sticker footprints on floors in every public space and private businesses all over the country, well, that just appeared out of nowhere and was not based on any science, according to Mr. Science. But that is just a small bit of evidence that backs up what President Reagan said. Whenever government tells you that they are going to help somebody or someone, they have to hurt or take something from someone first. Government's only role is to secure the liberty of its citizens. Quote unquote, helping is a double-edged sword. We've discussed this many times on this show before. The government does not manufacture or produce anything that allows it to make money. Government only, and now even more so than our country's past, reallocates or redistributes tax revenue that it uses coercion or threats of force to obtain from its citizens. When a government official, elected or employee, informs one citizen or a group of citizens that they are there to help, they first must hurt another citizen or group of citizens. The same thing applies to somebody running for elected office. Ronald Reagan, a great Republican president, said those words. Now I want you to compare them to the following words. Quote, "My enthusiasm is rooted in a genuine desire to help people and positively impact our community. I believe in the power of service, and together we can build a stronger, more vibrant future for Sevier County. Unquote. Now, who do you think uttered those words? Rest assured, I did not say those words because I understand what the proper role of the state government is, what it is supposed to be, and can only be restored to its proper role by people who understand that. People that understand that when government helps some people, it hurts other people. That statement that I quoted, ladies and gentlemen, came from none other than, now get this, Sevier County Commissioner Fred Ashley, the other currently declared candidate in the race for the GOP nomination to represent House District 12 here in Tennessee. I, for one, have had all the quote unquote help I want or need from the Sevier County Commission, and for sure do not need somebody with that type of mentality serving in the Tennessee General Assembly. We already have enough so-called Republicans in Nashville helping us Tennesseans. How about you? For the residents of Sevier County, the choice in the August primary should be completely clear. Do you want more government help from feckless trans-publicans that quote unquote help us? Or do you want a state government that will actually stand in the gap between an increasingly overreaching federal, central government that has already helped us too much? And it's time for a change. For now, though, it's time to take a break. So I'll be right back after this brief pause. And we're back for the final full segment. In this segment, I want to address the situation with the alphabet mafia and their obsession with drugging and mutilating children. Before I dive deep into that, I'd like to remind my fellow Tennesseans that one of the preeminent organizations that was, and probably still is, involved in that evil just happens to have its home here in the volunteer state. Now, that would be Vanderbilt University and the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. If you remember the media personality, Matt Walsh, he played a big role in exposing Vanderbilt and its euphemistically labeled gender-affirming care to the public last year or year before last. Thinking back, I loved how he just absolutely schooled the communists in our General Assembly when he appeared before them to provide testimony. It was a brilliant takedown. I believe that that event, at least here in Tennessee, was a great start to the pushback of this evil practice. A practice, by the way, that has it at its roots the social contagion brought about by the double-edged sword that is addictive social media algorithms, along with the woke curriculums in government indoctrination centers called public schools. Anyway, as I said, it was a great start. I also want the public to not forget that the General Assembly here in Tennessee knew, or should have known, what was happening at Vanderbilt. The information was in the public domain long before Mr. Walsh went national with it. But now that more and more of the public is becoming aware of this real pandemic of mental illness in children and how it is being facilitated by the commies and their willing allies and useful idiots, we may actually turn the corner on this issue. I read a couple of issues this past week that provide some sane adults with some ammunition in this battle to save children's lives. The first bit of information I read came from the American Principles Project. We have discussed lobbyists and special interest groups on this program quite often. For the most part, almost all of these organizations have zero regard for the liberty of citizens. They use their money and efforts to push for legislation that is beneficial to that organization, which is often to the detriment of the liberty of the people. A group of people that seems to be underrepresented in our republic today is the traditional family unit. And lately, we have all been witness to the increasingly hostile, progressive, or communist attacks on parents and children. Well, the American family cannot afford to be without a political cavalry to defend it. As I stated earlier, the bit of information I read up on, which we'll get to in a second, came to me from the American Principles Project, or APP. This is an organization that seeks to make the family the most powerful, well-represented special interest group in Washington, D.C., which would be quite a refreshing change. There are some pro-family groups which already exist that largely focus their efforts on education and tracking legislation, which is needed, but it isn't enough. APP is a national pro-family organization engaging directly in campaigns and elections. The information they provided me with was about the drug called Lupron. That is one of the puberty blockers given to children suffering from the mental illness gender dysphoria. Originally, Lupron was used to treat prostate cancer. While it's not considered a chemotherapy, its original use was definitely not designed as a puberty blocker. It is also used in the chemical castration of convicted sex offenders. Lupron is marketed by Abbott Laboratories and has been doing so from 2008 to the present day. Now, isn't Abbott Industries or Laboratories, isn't that one of those big pharma companies that Biden is touting that he is attacking or fighting against? Fighting big pharma is a lie. It's coming from the usurpers. The new aristocracy needs these big pharma companies to pump out these drugs that alter or control the public. But that isn't all the lies told as it relates to big pharma. We've been told that these puberty blockers are reversible in children. Now, here's an interesting fact. One of the nationalized health programs that these commies want to emulate here in the United States, it's Britain's National Institute of Health. Well, they declared in 2020 that these puberty blockers in children are no longer harmless or reversible, even going so far as to admit that there is very little known about the long-term effects of these drugs on children. In fact, there was a recent study that said these puberty blockers are in fact lowering the IQ of children. Now, the next bit of information comes from an article in the Daily Caller. There's an organization called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH. Their physicians acknowledge that puberty blockers are more invasive than portrayed in the media and can have irreversible effects on minors, such as infertility, bone loss, and disruption of brain development. Now, that's according to WPATH educational sessions obtained by the Daily Caller News Foundations. WPATH is a transgender medical organization that has published influential clinical guidance for the sex reassignment industry, and they call them the standards of care, which recommends children receive puberty suppression, cross-sex hormones, and sex reassignment surgery. However, during some educational sessions recorded in September 2022 that were part of a transgender medicalization certification program offered to WPATH licensed clinicians, WPATH doctors revealed that the consequences of puberty blockers for minors are often far more disruptive than portrayed in the media. Now, Metzger also went on and discussed how the effect of puberty suppression on adolescents, their developing brains, is not fully known. But keep in mind the previous study that I mentioned about how it is lowering the IQs of children. Dr. Metzger also warned that if puberty blockers are started too early, boys may not develop the genital tissue needed to create a surgical vagina later in life. Quite the catch-22 there for these mentally ill children that are enabled by their Transhausen by proxy syndrome parents. Metzger went on to say, when you think about vaginoplasty, the creation of a vagina in an assigned male, you need tissue, genital tissue, to create that vagina. And if we are taking an 11-year-old boy who does not have a lot of genital tissue and blocking puberty right there, we're preventing the growth of the vagina for down the road. In their clinical guidance, WPATH recommends that children are informed on the impact that sex reassignment medical interventions have on fertility, as well as understanding fertility preservation options. But what child can fully grasp that information? Especially when they are mostly informed or their opinions are shaped by social media that they are addicted to. I encourage you all to read the entire article that I'm quoting from here to see for yourselves the depravity of these people in the drugging, torture, and mutilation of children, all to achieve some sort of political advantage, or in the case of pharma, to get lifelong patients. But with all that being said, I'm going to take a quick break before I come back for closing out the show with God's Word. We'll be right back. Well, folks, that will wrap up this week's episode. The evil and insidiousness of the alphabet mafia and the drugging and mutilation of our nation's children can no longer be ignored. Another thing that can no longer be ignored, and in fact must be fought back against just as hard as we need to fight back against what is happening along our southern border and the human trafficking that is enabled by the invasion as well as the efforts to destroy children, is the notion that government's job is to help people. Its function, government's only function, is to secure the liberty of the people. Robbing from one person or group of people to help another is the opposite of securing the people's liberty. It is eroding it. Government help becomes the death of 1,000 cuts. We have to shake off the apathy that has gripped the republic and the belief in candidates that want to, quote unquote, help us. Now, we will close this week's show with wisdom from God's word, and it comes to us from Matthew chapter 12, verse 30. Anyone who isn't with me opposes me, and anyone who isn't working with me is actually working against me. Our current government is working hard to take away from us our Creator's gift of free will. Our government is seeking to replace our Creator with itself, filled with people that seek to get elected with promises to help. When our government helps one person, it hurts another. Maybe not physically, but definitely through the erosion of their liberty. As will become the norm for the next few months, I will be including this disclaimer in each of my episodes. The statements in this podcast, as they relate to my campaign and my political positions, are authorized by and paid for by the committee to elect Larry Linton. Larry Linton, treasurer. Well, folks, that wraps it up. Until next week, I humbly pray and ask that you stand in the arena with me, reveling. It's time to wake up.